Good morning, everybody. Everybody good? Great. Yeah, sorry. If you're like me, you're feeling marginally cogent this morning. I got home around 1:30 and I was like, I still have a third of this presentation to put together. So I'm going to do this on very little sleep, but good morning, everybody. Very excited to be here. Alex was tweeting earlier this week that these summits feel a little bit like a family reunion, like the good kind. And it's always a huge, kind of crazy, great feeling to be here meeting kind of new members of the Awesome Foundation family and then people just at this point who I've known for a very long time through Awesome Foundation. So Obvious tasked me with giving a history of the origin story of the Awesome Foundation in the next 10 minutes or so. And if you've come to these summits before, you may have heard this origin story many, many times, and maybe even heard me tell that story to you many, many times. And so this time, in large part to kind of relieve my own boredom, I wanted to take a different approach to telling the tale of how Awesome Foundation got started, partially as a way to think in new ways about sort of what the Awesome Foundation even is exactly, and understanding why such a strange idea even works at all. And so this talk is called Small Things. So here's a good place to start. It's important to remember that the Awesome Foundation sort of didn't begin with dreams of world domination. We never thought that it would spread across continents and oceans in the way that it has, or even basically that a decade on we'd have a dedicated summit that would bring people together to talk about Awesome Foundation. Instead, our question when we started Awesome Foundation was something much, much, much smaller. Which is, how do you make living in the city of Boston more awesome? Boston, if you've been there, has a lot going for it, right? It's filled with universities and cultural institutions and communities doing all sorts of really fun and interesting things. But for all this, Boston is what you might call kind of under-awesomed, certainly when I was living there, right? It was hard to bring people together, it was hard to get new things started, and it was hard to find where cool things were happening. It was just hard to find it. And so, me and a group of friends started talking about this, and it brought up a big question, I think almost a philosophical question, if you will, which is, how do you make a place more awesome? Well, okay, so one idea is that places are more awesome if there's physical spaces where lots of people can get together and hang out, right? If lots of people can meet each other, new ideas can emerge, and the world is more awesome as a result. And so we chased this idea for a little while. So how do you get a space set up? How do you get people to show up there? It turns out this is really difficult if you've tried to do this before, and it's also really expensive to do. You have to get a lease, you have to register to get permits, you need to get someone to manage the space. It's really difficult. So, the question remains, right? How do you make a place more awesome? Well, another approach might be to set up a charity, right? So the theory here is that there's lots of awesome ideas floating around, but not always the resources necessary to get those awesome projects done. And so if we gave them the resources to do that, maybe the place that we live in would be more awesome. Really basic theory. So we chased this idea around for a little while more. How do you get a nonprofit set up, right? How do you get it funded? Turns out this is difficult and also really expensive if you've tried to do it before. So you need to file all sorts of legal registrations, you need to hire a lawyer to help you out, you need to do all sorts of reporting and put together a formal board, you need to spend most of your time fundraising. It's exhausting, actually, if you've looked into it. We also chased after raising money from a foundation, so we called around. That didn't work either. I remember pitching a foundation which will remain nameless. I kind of got them on the phone and sort of explained what we want to do. We're like, we're trying to make Boston more awesome. And there's a long pause on the phone, and he was like, we don't fund awesome. Which is like a slip of the tongue, right? He meant like, this is too vague, we don't fund this, but like, it's just like so revealing about what it means, about how foundations think about funding in the space. So we had hit basically a bunch of dead ends. I think we spent almost like a year and a half being like, how do we make Boston more awesome? And then basically like, well, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And we wanted to do this, but we didn't have a whole lot of resources. There wasn't room to launch a space or any traditional foundation stuff. So in the end, we kind of just looked around and said, what do we have right now? And what we had is very commonplace. In fact, so commonplace, I think we actually missed it as the driving force of the Awesome Foundation for a number of years. And really what we had was people. We had 10 people, right? Some of them were friends, but actually some of them were acquaintances. They didn't actually even meet until the first meeting of the Awesome Foundation in Boston. But they had one thing in common, basically, is that they all wanted to make Boston more awesome. So when we launched, the Awesome Foundation was really more an aspiration or a rumor or an urban legend more than anything else. We basically just put up a public statement saying, here's a bunch of 10 people in your neighborhood, we're trying to make this place more awesome, come and hang out with us, right? which is like, the very littlest you could imagine possibly doing. And of course, because the Awesome Foundation, we also had a formula, right? 10 people, once a month, $1,000 per month. But as has pointed out a number of times, there's actually nothing magical about this formula. It's an easy way of explaining what we do, but chapters routinely violate this all the time and are wildly successful. And so anyone who's been an Awesome Foundation member for some time realizes that a big part of the value in these trustees and in these grantees is the moral support, some would say pressure, the volunteer time, the connections to others, and publicity. No doubt the grant helps, but it's really only a piece of a much bigger picture. And so you could actually even imagine a chapter that doesn't give away money at all. It could just say, we're 10 volunteers that choose a project to all help out on. And that could be equally successful. So all the Awesome Foundation was, at the beginning, really was a promise that a group of people in your community were going to try to make it better. And this is a small thing that looks almost incredibly insubstantial when you think about it, right? A city like Boston is relatively huge. What can 10 people just saying they want to do good stuff actually do? But it actually, in retrospect, turned out to be really key. This weird sort of public commitment was what got the community excited. It encouraged people to get in touch with us. And interestingly, also got other people to get in touch with us saying, like, can we start a chapter? I think the first chapter was Providence. And they got in touch and they were like, do you have any process for setting up the Awesome Foundation? And we were like, no, you're an Awesome Foundation now. Just to give you a sense of the amount of like thinking that went into this whole project. And ultimately this intention was a virtuous cycle. The excitement from the world beyond us also got us excited, which kept us moving on doing more and more awesome things. And so in short, declaring awesome generated more awesome. And I do think it worked. I do think the Awesome Foundation did play some part in helping Boston to be more awesome. What I remember most, and some of you may have had this experience in starting Awesome Foundations, is how much the project is just sort of this insanely great mechanism for supporting and meeting like crazy people that you wouldn't otherwise meet. And the canonical first project of Awesome Foundation that we often talk about is this giant hammock that we funded, right? If you want to read about it, there's a lot of press about that. But there's actually another project that always sticks in my mind that we don't talk about from the first year. It's this guy, Josh Gordonson. And his proposal, when it came to us, began, I've been building cotton candy making devices since I was 10. Which this is already going to be great, right? Even before you start, like, this, I'm sold, yeah. Just like, I have one vote this month, it's going to be this one. After a number of failed attempts, I finally produced my first standard output cotton candy machine in 2000. Standard output? Since then, I've been working on 2 new designs, the insane output cotton candy machine and the cotton candy cannon. This summer, I've newly perfected the cotton candy cannon design. Please fund me to do this cotton candy cannon. This was probably the shortest meeting in Awesome Foundation history. Because we basically sat down and we're like, did you see the cotton candy guy? Okay, let's do it. One funny anecdote actually is that we funded him, and it turned out he was this like undergrad at MIT, and it was like kind of parents' week where the parents would come to and like make sure their freshman kids were doing okay. And we were doing a party, and he was showing off the cotton candy devices he had built. And his parents kind of took me aside, and they're like, we thought when he got to college he'd be like done with this cotton candy thing. And then you guys just came in and were like, this is awesome, keep going. So we did a little good in the world that day. So at least for me, it's experiences like that one that keep the Awesome Foundation growing and moving over time. And the mission has proven surprisingly global over the last decade. So everyone at the summit basically testifies to the idea that there's kind of all these communities around the world that are really interested in making their places more awesome. It's also a surprisingly radical project. So on the one hand, we do have the trappings of a foundation. We give out grants, people are trustees, heck, we even call ourselves a foundation, which if you've been asked, like, so are you a foundation? You're like, well, ish, right? But it's important not to lose sight of what lies under that. And it is really wild if you think about it, right? The Awesome Foundation is essentially a loosely connected alliance of roving bands of do-gooders throughout the planet. It was remarked to me, they were like, well, actually the Awesome Foundation is a vast global conspiracy to making things a little bit better, which I'm okay with. I'm happy to be part of that conspiracy with you all. There's also a radical message behind that radical project, right? The Awesome Foundation is living proof that the barriers to making things more awesome might be a lot lower than we expect, right? You don't need to own a building, you don't need to have a big foundation to start making things better, and I think that's a really powerful message. So one final thought, you maybe sometimes get into your own head about this, I certainly do, right? That Awesome Foundation is kind of easy to dismiss as something silly or frivolous in these sort of uncertain and dark times. But I don't know, after thinking about it a lot, I actually don't buy that. Like, I think that making communities more awesome may be especially important in these uncertain and dark times. A few decades ago, the sociologist Robert Putnam wrote a great book called Bowling Alone. It's definitely worth a read if you haven't seen it before. And the book basically argues that the decline of informal groups and organizations, like local bowling leagues, actually have a major impact on the health of society. And it's because these sort of seemingly unimportant institutions tie communities together and create relationships that are key for a range of important things, right? Big things like getting democracy to work, and sort of small critical things like where are you going to get your next job, right? And the Awesome Foundation in that sense may be something kind of important hiding in something what seems, in something that seems quite silly. You know, I think in doing what we do, connecting people and communities, supporting amazing things happening in them, and creating a global network of people doing the same thing, you know, I actually strongly believe that we play a really big role in the bigger story of making communities robust and healthy. And so for me, that's hugely exciting, and you know, I'm thrilled to discover where this all goes with you all. So thank you for your time this morning.